Alright, it's finally time for the finale of Hoard of the Dragon Queen, Book 1 in the Tyranny of Dragons campaign. Today we're going over Skyreach Castle from Chapter 8, Castle in the Clouds. I'm Dad the Dungeon Master. I've been a DM for over a decade. I am a published author and I have run this campaign for multiple groups, so I've made every mistake and I'm going to help you guys avoid those. So let's dig in. So this chapter is super exciting. It's a lot of fun. Your characters are level 7. There are a lot of enemies in this castle. There is a lot of stuff going on here. There are multiple different groups. There are multiple different NPCs, and they're not all exactly in agreement with each other. It's not a perfect alliance. So if your party wants to succeed at defeating this dungeon, at winning this finale, they have to figure out how to work those groups against each other. The best way that things can work out for the party, considering the stuff I know about the next book, about the rest of the adventure, is for both the castle to survive and to end up on the side of the giants. Because no matter what happens, you're going to be fighting dragons. Giants have an age-old hatred for dragons, and if you can get the giants on your side, it's going to help your party in the long run. And they're really the only one of these groups that the party has a viable chance of getting to their side. So if you ran Parnast, like I suggested in the last video, or if your party just happened to do things this way, they arrive at the upper courtyard via Wyvern coming from Parnast. That, I think, is the most exciting way to do the Parnast section, and I think it makes this chapter run with the best flow. Like all the chapters, they pretty much assume that your party is still sneaking around and pretending to be cultists, which, if you have Talus the White with you, will be a little bit easier. I suggested over the last couple videos that you bring Talus with you, both because there are a lot of very powerful enemies here, and because she can help you get access to the castle, and it makes for an exciting moment if and when she betrays the party. So what I'm going to do is, just like Castle Neratar, I'm going to go through all the rooms. This castle is actually not as big. There's not as much stuff going on as is happening in Castle Neratar. I'm going to go through all the rooms, talk about everybody who's here, what they're doing, where they're at the moment the party arrives, because that's basically how the chapter is set up. And then I'm going to explain how to run the flow of this chapter, because the way I see it narratively, you're reaching the climax of this adventure, you're reaching the climax of this first book, which is kind of like the first book in a 2-book series, and you want there to be a big exciting climax with the largest stakes of all, and you, in this type of story, in a fantasy hero's journey adventure, you want that to be a battle, and you want the stakes to be evident to the people involved, to your players, and you want to have a satisfying cathartic experience where you defeat the villain they've been chasing the whole time, Resmir, and you don't want it to be in a quiet room. You want it to be part of an epic battle, and then you want the fallout of that climax to answer some questions and to feel like a satisfying come down and to lead into book 2. So I'm going to explain how to make all that happen with the pieces that the book gives you, because throughout this whole book, they tend to give the DM pieces and expect that they have enough experience both with DMing and just storytelling in general to put the pieces together in the right way. And there are times when they make good suggestions for DMs, but I think a lot of this doesn't have enough support, especially for newer DMs. And if this is the climax of your first journey that you've taken players on, the ending of the story is the most important. The beginning's the second most important, in my opinion. The ending is the most important. Obviously, the middle has to be good enough to get readers or players to the end, but the end has to be special. It has to have that moment, that just culmination that makes all of the effort that they went through to get here worth it. So we're going to make sure that happens. So the history of the castle is pretty much this. Way back in the day, giants and dragons had this big epic war. This castle was created with magic, and they turned this ice as hard as stone. They made the towers and the walls, and they imbued it with the spirit of a cloud giant to control it, to make it fly. And ever since then, they have been using it for their own purposes. It doesn't explain this in the book, but it seems to me that the spirit of the giant that inhabits the castle, that's like the spirit of the castle, is the last cloud giant that died there, because there is a cloud giant that's like in charge of the castle, and his deceased wife is the spirit of the castle, And there's an instance where if he gets killed in the adventure, he becomes the new spirit, I guess pushing her spirit out, which obviously he doesn't want that. Nobody wants to die. But I don't think it's the same spirit for the last hundreds of years or however long it's been. And now the giant that's in charge, he has made a tenuous deal with the Cult of the Dragon. It does seem weird. His plan is he thinks that if he makes the dragons a big enough threat, that it will unite the giants against a common enemy and basically bring peace and unity to giant culture. A little bit crazy, but not the craziest plan I've ever heard. Everything in this castle is built for giants. The ceilings are 30 feet high, the doors are 20 feet high, 8 feet wide, and the handles are 10 feet off the ground. That does make me wonder how all these medium creatures are having such an easy time moving around, but that is one aspect that I kind of gloss over it. I say everything's giant size, but I'm not like, hey, the door handles are 10 feet high. Every door you have to figure out how you're going to open it. Skill checks. No, I don't worry about all that. I'm just like, okay, you can push the doors open or whoever. It's not that big of a hassle. So yeah, everything's big. You should describe it as kind of being a pain in the butt for the players, but I don't make them roll like athletics checks to climb stairs because they're so big or anything like that. It's more for flavor and to explain how these giants and other creatures are moving around in here without not being able to fit through the doors. The book doesn't say if the interior rooms are lit in most cases. Usually at the beginning of like a dungeon, it'll have like a section that explains how the lighting is set up. The book doesn't do that for this castle. So I just kind of assume that because it's ice, as long as it's daylight outside, all the walls kind of have their own like faint blue glow that kind of keeps everything lit. As I mentioned, there are several important NPCs in here. Instead of just going down a whole list and giving you like a character dossier for each one of them and giving you a whole big block of information that's going to be hard to absorb all at once, I will explain the significance of each of the NPCs as we go through. Some of them you're familiar with, some of them will be new, but it'll probably be easier to absorb that information with the context of where they're at and what their purpose is in this dungeon. Area 6 is the main gate. This is where you would have come through if you had just walked across the drawbridge into the castle when it was still set up next to Parnast. As I said before, this is the boring way to get in, and it kind of makes you have to go up and down. It's not my favorite way to do it. I prefer the exciting stealing the wyverns and flying through the sky to the upper courtyard. This main gate consists of the drawbridge that can be raised, a huge iron portcullis in this gateway, and the two gate towers on either side. So area 6A is the gateway and the golems. So this is just the gateway that goes in, and on either side, like under the archway, are two 18-foot tall statues of cloud giants, one male, one female, stone golems. If you don't say one of those two passphrases, Tiamat, our mother in strength, or Hail Blagothkus, the first person to pass through activates one of them. The second person to pass through activates the second one. Luckily, your party's probably not just trying to storm the castle without learning any of the passphrases. Ideally, you have Talis the White. Extra ideally, you landed upstairs. During the day, whenever the castle's at Parnast, carts full of treasure are coming through here. The book kind of hints at the party being able to hide in one of those carts and sneak on as one of the options. The way you should do that is roll a perception check for the golems against the player's stealth check when they hid in the carts. But just know that if these two stone golems get activated, it is going to be winnable, but rough. Area 6B is the two guard towers. The north tower is 120 feet high and the south tower is 80 feet high. They each are topped with ballista manned by 3 ogres. They have javelins they can throw, and they can also load the javelins in the ballista. Each of these rooftops has a trapdoor that leads down to a spiral staircase, then winds its way down to the ground floor of the tower. Each of those has a crank manned by a single ogre. The crank in the north tower raises and lowers the drawbridge. The crank in the south tower raises up and down the iron portcullis. It is a DC 15 strength check to operate these cranks. It takes 2 successful checks, each one raising or lowering its respective mechanism halfway. The ogres have been told not to respond to the general alarm or anything else, to stay at their post and protect these cranks. One of the towers has a door that releases into the courtyard, and the south tower has that door that releases into the barracks. Area 7 is the lower courtyard. As they enter, it's this big open area, open to the sky, high ice walls all around. There are some doors to buildings along the bottoms of the walls, And then on the far side is an overhanging upper courtyard, 100 feet up. That's where you would land with the Wyverns. And there's like an ice archway, and there's some other little buildings underneath. And if your party rolls a DC 22 perception check, they can see in the shadows underneath a doorway that opens to a spiral staircase. That is great vision because that's a pretty big distance. During the day, there's nothing here. It doesn't say there's anything here. If your party's coming straight from Parnast, I have like a few wagons with some cultists unloading and transporting the loot off the wagons, just grouped over to one side. If it's night, fog covers this entire courtyard. It is heavily obscured. And then fog lightly obscures the upper courtyard. And there is a vampire named Sandeshel who patrols the lower courtyard and the upper courtyard at night. She lives in one of the towers on the upper courtyard. We'll talk about that when we get there. But because she's present here, I'll go ahead and describe her personality and what she's up to. She is a moon elf who actually joined the cult long before she was undead. And if given the chance, she will talk about Sammaster, the old cult leader before Severin took over. And she remembers, I guess, kind of fondly, how they used to slay dragons in order to raise them as Draco Liches. And she hates the new leadership. She thinks the old way is the true path. She wishes things would go back to the way they were before. So, even though she is an evil undead vampire, she does not prefer the way that the cult is going. So, theoretically, you could probably convince her to flop sides, because you tell her like, hey, we're going to take down this thing that they're doing now. And then after that, you could put things together the way you want. The book doesn't go in depth about her personality other than that she hates the new regime and preferred it the old way. And the only way that you're going to have that chance is if you confront her at night, which the way that I set things up, they come to this castle during the day. Because one of the reasons that I do that is it's lame to have this heavy fog and not be able to see any of the beautiful walls and structure of the castle, and not be able to see during combat, and not be able to have like the experience of viewing the castle and getting to see what's happening. So I prefer it being during the day. That being said, when you get up to her tower, she is in there. Theoretically, if you defeat her two vampire spawn that are protecting her, you could like wake her up. It's not sunlight in there. She's in a little crypt, and you could talk to her. But the chances of your party waking up a vampire to try to treat with them instead of just like staking her in the heart while she sleeps, very thin. I have had games where parties never encountered her because they got through this whole thing during the day and they never went up into her tower. Her entrance to where she's at is like 75 feet off the ground. There has been one time that I've had a party stay on the castle long enough for night to fall before they fought and defeated all the enemies, because they were kind of trying to spy and sneak and go espionage and do other things, and they ended up deciding to wait. And they ran into her, and I had her say her part about wishing things were the way they were before. They attempted to negotiate with her. I made it a DC 20 for the persuasion checks to try and get her to flop sides. They did not roll well enough, and so they ended up fighting her. It's not like a brutal fight. She's not crazy powerful. But what usually happens with her is that the party goes and does all this stuff because you're in a castle. The book kind of sometimes make it seem like you're going to be in dungeons for days or weeks. This is not the only book that does that. I've read multiple books that kind of act like you're going to be in dungeons for hours and days. I don't know why they think that. In my personal opinion as a DM, it's very dangerous to long rest in a dungeon because there's monsters there and they're going to find you and attack you. So the chances of you actually sleeping for 8 hours is very thin. But what usually ends up happening with her is after the party's defeated all the bad guys and the castle hasn't been crashed, if they achieve that and they're traveling to wherever they're going with Blagothkus, when night falls that first time, then I have her show up and be like, where is everybody? What happened? And I could just have her leave. She's a vampire. She could just fly off and be like, well, not my problem anymore. But I usually have her approach the party and ask them what happened. And kind of like, vampires are known for being charismatic. And this is like a fun moment as like the climax is over and things are kind of cooling off. And then you're either hanging out in one of the rooms or you're having like a fire out in the courtyard, and you're traveling and the starry sky above you is beautiful. And this you know, vampire lady comes waltzing out. Like you thought you cleared the whole place out. And there's usually a fun little RP moment where you're like, for a second, they're like, we thought everything was over. And, she will discuss with the party what they're doing. And when she hears their plans, because obviously she's outmatched at this point, all of her allies are gone. I've actually had a couple times where she ended up deciding to help the party going forward, and throughout the next book was an NPC that was mostly off screen. She's a vampire, so she can't really travel with the party because daylight. But they kind of had her as like an extra ally that they could seek information from, send her to go do missions and stuff. There were other times where she talked to the party, they discussed things. She's like, okay, well, I guess you guys are taking care of that. I am going to go figure out what I'm going to do next. And she leaves. That's fine. It's just a fun little, like, one last little moment of surprise when they think everything's over. And I think it works really well for that purpose. The spiral staircase that they saw leads up to the upper courtyard and down to the tunnels below that have been carved through this iceberg. If combat were to break out in this courtyard for some reason, it would alert the ogres in Area 6, the cultists in Area 9, the stone giants in Area 10, the kobolds from Area 15, and one of the cultists would run to Area 11 to get Resmir. Luckily, there's nothing really to fight in the courtyard, and it doesn't say that if combat opens up in one of the rooms that everybody hears. So it's technically possible to go to each one of these rooms and handle them individually. But just so you know, if something were to happen in the courtyard, it's going to get real bad real fast. Area 8 is the stables. There are 2 wyvern in here. The book says that they are hungry and attack anybody they don't recognize that comes in. If you end up clearing out the stables, there is treasure in there. There are 4 bridles built for wyverns that are inlaid with jade and have mithril bits that are worth 500 gold pieces each. Area 9 is the cultist barracks. It smells like unwashed bedclothes. It's basically BO. It's what every barracks you've ever imagined looks like. There's 14 beds, there's chests and tables and random stuff in here. There are at any time 10 dragon wings in here, half of which are asleep, the other half are just chilling. It doesn't say this specifically, but if you're with Talus or if you come in here pretending to be cultists, I would assume they're just going to think you're more cultists. There's a lot of cultists that don't wear uniforms. Everybody's not familiar with everybody. So combat's not going to start immediately when you walk in here. And these cultists don't just roam the castle. They don't come out of here unless there's an alarm sounded or they are called by the ogres for reinforcements. Area 10 is the stone giant's chamber. In here is a large stone table with 3 chairs, a large iron chest in the corner, and a cauldron sitting on top of the table. Currently, it is occupied by 2 stone giants named Wilgolf and Huldra. Wilgolf is looking down into the cauldron because he's using it to cast an augury spell in order to see if Blagothkus' plan to side with the cult and unite the giants is going to have good or negative consequences, and to see if the cult is actually planning on betraying Blagothkus, which he's afraid of. And Huldra, the giant sitting in the chair, is his companion and bodyguard. If you attack them, she will respond with brutal force. They are guests of Blagothkus, and even though they have their own reservations about his plan, they are supporting him. They're going along with the plan. They've agreed to help him with repairs to the castle and in its defense if necessary. The book states that if an alarm hasn't gone up, that you actually have a surprise round against the giants. Again, we talked about surprise round. That doesn't really exist. It's stealth versus perception. One person can be surprised, the other not. But it assumes that you're just going to go in and start attacking these guys. And while some parties might do that, the couple of times that I've run this and the players ran into these giants before they talked to Blagothkus, they did not immediately attack because they were pretending to be cultists, and theoretically everybody in this castle should be on peaceful terms with cultists. And so they've always been able to talk to the giants, ask them what was going on. So if your party just attacks these guys, it's going to be another difficult battle. It doesn't say that anybody can hear the combat, but with it being 2 stone giants and sharing a wall with Area 11, I make it so that Resmir in Area 11 can hear you if you get into combat, which I have not had a party do that. But if you do, it would make sense for Resmir to be able to hear. There is some treasure in here. The giant-sized iron chest in the corner is 6 feet long. It is 500 pounds, and it takes a DC 12 strength check just to remove the lid. And then inside the chest is a globe of force, which can be removed with an anti-magic shell or a successful casting of Dispel Magic with a DC 16. In there are 32 perfectly cut gemstones worth 16,000 gold. There are also the Stone Giant's masonry tools in there, but they are too big for any medium-sized creature to use, and so are basically worthless. The Iron Cauldron that Wilgolf is looking into weighs 50 pounds, and when filled with water, it can take the place of the material components to cast the augury spell. The Giants do know that the Area 19 up above is the control tower for the castle and that only Giants can get in. The book says that the Giants are hesitant to reveal any information, but if they are defeated and either threatened or bribed, they can be coerced into cooperation. I don't like the idea of just going around beating people up and making them give you information. It usually seems to work better in a multitude of different D&D situations to just try to persuade the enemies rather than just beating them up and forcing information out of them. That is still something that you need to do sometimes because some people are hostile and are not open to any type of communication unless forced into it. But that should be the rarer occurrence. And I get they're giants, but Wilgolf is obviously more of an intellectual. He's using this cauldron to cast augury. Yes, Huldra is basically a bodyguard, so maybe she would respond that way. But also with the amount of resources the party is going to need to make it through this, the just negotiating beforehand without all the combat stuff is probably the better way to go. That's up to your party, but some newer parties, they may think that they're supposed to just storm their way through here. So as a DM, I would kind of not, you don't have to necessarily come right out and say it, but I would definitely hint to the party that with it being such a large castle, with there being a cult presence here, with there probably being many enemies in here, that resource management, and they should have learned this by this point in the adventure, but if not, like just kind of remind them that resource management, burning through all their spells, burning through all their health potions and everything, that's going to be part of succeeding. So they need to be judicious about how they use their resources. Like I said, you may not want to just come straight out and say that because that kind of breaks the verisimilitude a little bit, but they need to understand that. If they're just going willy-nilly, fighting everybody they run into, you may want to try and like somehow slip it in there that they need to be more careful with just burning all their resources. Area 11 is Resmir's chamber. The door can be unlocked with either a knock spell or a DC 25 Thieves Tools check. The book says also you could knock and spin a beautiful yarn because cultists and servants come and go at all hours. But by this point in the adventure, Resmir should be very familiar, at least with the description of your party. Unless they've been very slick and just slid through this whole adventure, never alerting any bad guys that they were acting against them, maybe they could get away with it at this point. But by now, chances are she has had your entire party described to her multiple times for all of the wrenches they have thrown in the cult's plans. Especially you traveled north with a whole group of her people for like 2 months. So she's aware of the party. So that to me seems a little bit silly. She is in here with 2 guard drakes. She has a bed, she has a desk, and there's a fancy rug on the ground. The rug is actually a rug of smothering, and it says that if the party enters aggressively, Resmir and her 2 guard drakes will wait until the rug jumps up and attacks you, and then they will launch their attack, which that's funny, for one. But as we talked about before, as we talked about in Narratar, fighting her in this room with just her and her guard drakes and nobody else around and defeating her when she's kind of been the villain that's been, you know, behind the scenes, pulling the strings, that you've been chasing this whole adventure. You don't want her to fall in a quiet room. You know what I mean? You want her to be in the arena in front of the crowd. And that's a metaphor. It would be very anticlimactic for her to be defeated by the party basically alone in this quiet room. You want it to be a big, epic combat that feels like you're in the middle of a gladiator arena and everyone's there to see the villain fall. We are going to build that. So I like that it's a DC 25 to get in. I like that Resmir has the only key. The couple times that my party has tried to get into this room, because they don't know it's Resmir's room when they're on the outside, they have failed their Thieves Tools checks, thankfully, so I could put off them encountering her until the right time. But just know that if your party does get into that room and they do fight her, it's going to feel a little bit like, spoiler alert for the end of Game of Thrones, when Arya gets all the way to the end of Game of Thrones and instead of going and finishing her life's mission, she just decides to give up and walk away. I don't know how anybody else felt, but that felt like such a letdown for such a long build up. And I get it. She chose, peace instead of vengeance. At that point, especially with that kind of show, let me see her finish her life's goal. I get it. It was better for her. It was better for her soul. There's a part of me that thinks it's a beautiful way for her character to no. Finish the story. Give me the climax. Don't build all the way up to the climax and then rip the rug out from under my feet. So you don't want them to fight Resmir in this room. In this room on the desk, there is a chest wrapped with iron bands. This chest is enchanted so that if Resmir dies, the contents are teleported to the Well of Dragons. She has the only key, and it's a DC 20 Thieves tools to unlock it. The chest is trapped. It's a DC 20 investigation check to notice the trap, and a DC 15, it says dexterity, but it's Thieves tools. It's a DC 15 Thieves tools check to disarm the trap. If you don't notice, don't disarm the trap, or you fail the Thieves tools check by 5 or more, you get shot with a poison dart. You then have to make a DC 13 con save or take 7d6 poison damage because this is Wyvern poison, and Wyvern poison is brutal, or half as much damage on a success. If you are able to defeat Resmir without killing her and successfully get into this chest without everything being teleported away, it has all this stuff in it, including her black dragon mask. It would be a near devastating blow to the cult's plans if the party were to get that black dragon mask. The cult doesn't actually need all 5 masks. It's best if they have all 5, but their plan will function without them. Will you guys go in the other room? You're talking pretty loud. Sorry. It's okay. Love you. If you do happen to capture her, she is an incredibly obnoxious, annoying prisoner. She would rather die if it keeps the Black Dragon mask out of the enemy's hands, and she will constantly insult and berate the party. The best you can hope for is that she eventually gets tired of insulting you. She is a true believer. She's not going to be converted or convinced of anything else. Area 12 is the Red Wizard's room. In here, there are rugs covering the floors. There are windows that look out of the side of the iceberg, out of the castle. There are hundreds of horse skulls nailed to the ceiling, which are not anything special. They're just creepy. They're for ambiance. There are a bunch of different lecterns carved in different ways. It basically looks like an evil wizard's workshop. There are vials and little hunks of meat and books and all kinds of stuff. This is the room of Rath Modar. He is here to both help oversee the transport of the treasure to the Well of Dragons, and he is working on figuring out exactly how the Red Wizards are going to do their ritual to help resurrect Tiamat. Azbara Jos, if he's alive, which he should be, is also here. If you come into this room and they're not alerted, you will walk in on a conversation where they're having like a scholarly debate. If you fight them in here, which is not as bad as fighting Resmir, but again, this chapter works best if it all culminates in one big battle. Like I said, I'm just describing where everybody is at when you arrive and what they're up to. They will fight against you. Rath Modar doesn't really care about Azbara Jos. These Red Wizards are part of a fraction group who actually want to overthrow Saz-Tam and are hoping that once he helps resurrect Tiamat, the dragons will help him overthrow Saz-Tam. If it looks like you're going to defeat them, the wall between the 2 windows, if you touch it, it disappears for a minute and actually leads out onto a balcony. So you can go onto a balcony on the outside of the flying castle. I don't love heights, so that's a no for me. But the book says that if Rath Modar is going to be defeated, that he turns invisible, casts Fly on himself, and goes out through the balcony and leaves Azbara Jos to fend for himself. The book just describes him turning invisible as his invisibility trick. You can't cast 2 concentration spells simultaneously. In fact, invisibility and flying are one of the reasons why that limitation exists. That's one of the main reasons, because if you can be invisible and fly, you it's like this. They want to make sure he escapes because he's a big part of the next book. So in the 2 times that I have had my party fight these guys in this room, I had him. In my game, we can drink a potion as a bonus action. The players can do it, so the bad guys can do it. He casts Fly on himself as his action, and then drinks a potion of invisibility as his bonus action, and then just zips off into the sky. Yes, enemies can do things players can't do, but because he's a wizard, he has like wizard levels essentially. If he was a monster, or even as a wizard, you could give him abilities the players don't have, but those limitations on concentration, that's part of the basic mechanics of how magic works in this world. So if enemy wizards can cast multiple concentration spells, it would make the game really unbalanced towards enemy spellcasters. Like, it would be really tough to defeat any of them. So I don't think it's a good precedent to set that enemy spellcasters can have 2 concentration spells going. So Potion of Invisibility as his bonus action, Flight as his action, and Azbara Joes can figure it out. There are 4 gargoyle statues in here. 3 of them are just regular statues. 1 is actually a gargoyle, and he'll activate if you guys get into combat. That gargoyle will cover Rath Modar's escape just to help make sure narratively he gets away so that he can be in the next book. If the party gets to talk to the Red Wizards, their reputation for arrogance is absolutely true. You should roleplay these guys as haughty, arrogant. They look down on people who don't use magic. They see them as just ruffians and thugs. So roleplay it like that if your party does get to talk to them. If you did happen to defeat Rath Modar, he has spell scrolls of Dimension Door, Featherfall, Fireball, and a Staff of Fire. If you search the papers in this room, you will find several letters between Rath Modar and Severin, the leader of the Cult of the Dragon, and you can see that their companionship, their cooperation runs much deeper than anybody realized. And you will find some letters from Thay showing that not all of the Red Wizards are as keen on operating with the cult as Rath Modar is. The book says that if you take these letters to Leosin or Onthar Froom, you'll get 1,000 points of experience. We're using milestone leveling anyway, so that doesn't really matter, but it is good evidence to bring back to show some of what the cult is planning. On one of the lecterns, you will find a book called Beyond the Iron Gates, which is written in Infernal and talks about all sorts of devil summoning rituals. And the last chapter describes a sacrifice of hundreds of souls in order to bring Tiamat back from the 9 hells. The exact rituals, chants, and all that are not listed, just the concept of they're working on it and that it's possible. It clearly is something that will take a lot of preparation and expense, but it provides no timetable on where they're at in the machinations of preparing this ritual. Area 13 is the Storeroom. It's a DC 17 Thieves' Tools check to open the lock, and then Resmir and Blagothkus both have keys. The only stuff in here is like frozen sides of beef and different food and other things for just the nutrition of the people on the castle. Normally with things like this, I will add special stuff here just to make the room more interesting. But I kind of like that this is just like a mundane, like logical thing that the castle needs. They need food to survive. And I like kind of just having this one sort of offbeat where it's like, okay, yeah, there's a ton of magic and stuff going on here, but hey, they still need food. This is just a mundane food storage. By having something so mundane and normal, it's a good contrast to the strong magical things that are happening here. It just is a good way of showing the vast disparity in regular stuff and crazy magic stuff going on. Area 14 is the guest chambers. It's exactly what you think. They're human-sized guest chambers, and they have one of those vanishing walls that leads out onto that terrifying balcony. Area 15 is the kitchen. It is filled with 20 kobolds who are clamoring all over each other, stirring pots, kneading dough, chopping vegetables. It's just like a chaos kitchen that they're preparing all the food for this castle. And to me, that's just like a fun, like, Howl's Moving Castle, just the chaos and the kobolds. I don't know. I just think it's like a really fun, interesting visual. And then every once in a while, the kobolds will like get into a little scuffle. Blagothkus's pet griffin hangs out like on a ledge up above the kobolds, and whenever they get into a scuffle, he'll fly down and restore order. He will also protect the kobolds if they come under attack. The kobolds aren't going to attack your party if they walk in. They, like many of the servants throughout the last half of this adventure, are going to assume that you're a cultist. The griffin will probably stare down at you, but it's not going to attack you either as long as you don't cause trouble. There's no good reason for your party to attack these kobolds. It's just a fun little scene of kitchen chaos. There is treasure in here, technically. There are these sacks with different spices, nutmeg, cinnamon, pepper, and all that. And they seem pretty mundane, but they are actually worth 130 gold pieces total. Area 16 is the upper courtyard. This is where your party would land if they flew in on those wyverns, which is how I like to do it. At night, it's lightly obscured by fog, and there is a chance that the vampire will be here. Most likely your party is landing here during the day, but you can handle the vampire the same way I discussed before if it's night. During the day, there are 2d6 ogres here practicing with their javelins. When the party lands, those ogres will come over and basically be like, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" There are members of the cult who routinely land and fly away from here on wyverns, so as long as you have that banner and one of the passcodes, they are not going to attack you. Ideally, you have Talus the White with you so she can kind of smooth things over. When that happens, the ogres are going to escort you to Blagothkus. It doesn't say exactly why they decide to lead you straight to Blagothkus. It is good for the narrative to go ahead and go discuss with them as soon as you land. That's how I like to do it. Your first big NPC meeting is Blagothkus, but I don't know why the ogres would do that if they just thought you were regular cultists. They should just let you go. So what I've done the couple times that I've had people ask, why are they immediately taking us to Blagothkus if they trust that we're cultists, is I say that Blagothkus just kind of has a standing order for any new cultist the ogres haven't seen before, basically to come to him for their orientation, their introduction to the castle, their sort of welcome visit. He's a cloud giant. This is his castle. It makes sense for him to want to meet anybody who's going to be staying here. Area 17 is the High Blue Tower. It's this pale blue ice tower that shimmers like a mirror or crystal. There are 2 ogres at the top with ballista and rocks to fight off invaders. There's a door at the bottom that requires a DC 15 Thieves' Tools check to enter. If the ogres are fighting against the party, if they see the party and realize that they are enemies, they start firing ballista or rocks. It alerts all the ogres. And basically, if soon as an ogre yells, the alarm is sounded, and the people who are there to defend the castle, the ogres and everybody else, will all be alerted. Unless the party just lands and doesn't have the banner, doesn't have any of the passphrases, and immediately is just fighting with the ogres in the courtyard, there's really no reason for these guys to do that. But just so you know, if they need to, they do have rocks and javelins, and they will alarm the rest of the castle. They have ropes that they throw down and use to climb up and down to get to their place atop the tower. This tower, if you go inside, is just a hollow 90-foot cylinder. What this tower is if you say the name Esclarotta in here, which is the name of Blagothkus' deceased wife, who is the spirit of the tower, you will be teleported to her tomb, which is like this closed off room. I'll talk about it in a minute. The party won't have any reason to know her name unless Blagothkus has discussed it with them, and he doesn't really have any reason to ever tell them that. So the way that I use this room is, again, when you're doing the come down at the end after the climax and you guys are flying to wherever you and Blagothkus decide to go with the castle, during my monologue where I basically am ending this book and discussing the way that the adventure's coming to a close, I have Blagothkus bring the party here while they're on that journey, and he says Esclarotta. They go and he shows them his wife's tomb, and he tells them a little touching story about how beautiful and strong she was and how she was the better half of him. And I just have this little cathartic moment of humanizing this giant because I use him as an ally in the next book. I just use this as just a part of that kind of settling things down and wrapping up the end of this adventure. I just like the soft emotional impact that has. And otherwise you would never get to see it because there's really no reason for them to ever learn that's what this tower does. Area 18 is the Crumbling Tower. It's 100 feet high. There's a door at the bottom, but you can't open it because there used to be 4 levels inside, and 3 of those levels have all crumbled, and the bottom's just filled with 25 feet high of debris. It is in such disrepair that you can actually climb the tower pretty easily, and 75 feet up there is a balcony. It's a DC 10 athletics check to climb up there. The balcony is so damaged that if more than 150 pounds is placed on it, which most adventurers are more than that by themselves, it collapses. It doesn't say what to do when it collapses. I make it a DC 15 dexterity check to try to grab back onto the tower as the balcony falls. Otherwise, the party member is going to take 7d6 bludgeoning damage when they fall. The door connected to that balcony opens up into the upper room of this tower. In here is where Sandeshel the vampire's crypt is. She has her coffin with the lid, and it says that day and night it is defended by her 2 consorts. It doesn't say anything about the consorts, what stat blocks to use for them or anything. They're enemies, but there is no stat block in the book. I make them vampire spawn. That's an easy stat block to get. It makes sense thematically. There is a staircase that you can go down, but it ends after a few feet, and then it's just nothing to the bottom of that tower for like 50 feet. So it's a staircase that leads to nowhere. I have had parties come up here. They fought the vampire spawn, defeated them really quick. One of those 2 times, they had an idea to stake the vampire in the heart. So I just had her like wake up for a second and then fall dormant. And as long as that stake's in her heart, she's going to stay dead. So they just staked her in the heart. They went on with their business. They didn't really question that much why there was this random vampire up here. And then the other time, they didn't stake her in the heart. They just attacked her. And she ended up fighting. And I had her talk during combat, which is something that I forget to do sometimes. A lot of DMs forget to have enemies talk. Talking during combat, especially with an interesting enemy, you can really get a lot of the story and some fun roleplay moments across to the party during combat. You shouldn't always just be silently attacking each other. Like I have this idea in my head of good guys and bad guys, they're fighting, and it's just like the clang of armor and weapons and fireballs going off, and everyone's just not making a sound, not saying a word. It's just this stone stare at each other while you're fighting to the death. But I had her talk, and she was able to realize that she was outmatched and say, hey, I don't really like the way things are going with the cult. And she tried to run her game of like, this isn't my deal. If you just let me go. They ended up deciding that she's a vampire and that's evil enough. So they slew her. But she is an interesting character. So make sure she tries to say her part to add a little bit of depth to the world and just get that characterization out for the party to enjoy. Area 19 is the steering tower. This door can only be opened 2 ways, 3 ways. 2 ways, really. Blagothkus has the only key to this door. It can be opened with a knock spell, or it takes a DC 70 strength check to unlock. That is ridiculous because even a giant cannot roll a DC 70 strength check. So I think that's just like an inside joke from the creators of this book saying like, hey, nobody's allowed in here. So chances are your party is not going to get in here until everything's handled and Blagothkus may bring them in here. This is where he comes after you talk to him, whether you deal with him and he lives or dies, his soul or his body is going to come to this room and start driving this tower. If you make your way up to the top room of this tower, you will see emeralds and moonstones and spheres of turquoise and gold and mithril wands and dozens of copper levers sticking out of the walls. This is the steering room for the castle. When nobody is present, Esclarotta, the spirit of the castle, drives. And once you like engage in trying to steer the castle, all of the walls disappear and the floor, and you can see in every direction like you're just hanging in the air. So you can steer and see where you're going. There will be more than a dozen glowing runes floating around the room like snowflakes, and each of these runes causes the castle to do something. It's a big list of directions and making clouds and all kinds of stuff. I'll throw it up instead of going through every single one. If you happen to get the chance to drive the castle, you will need this list. You're probably not going to get the chance unless Blagothkus, after everything's over, is like, hey, do you want to take the wheel, son? You know what I'm saying? So this list probably won't matter. But if you're curious, this is what all you can do with the castle. This room can give the castle commands, but it's actually Esclarotta that controls it. So you're really like making requests of her, and she can lock out anyone that she thinks is trying to misuse this room. If you succeed on a DC 15 Arcana check, you can tell that there's a presence to this room beyond what can really be seen or heard. And if you call out to her, you can communicate with her. It's a DC 14 persuasion check to convince her to do what you request. Like even if you push a rune to go up or down or whatever, you have to convince her to do that. This check is made with advantage if the character speaks giant. She is a kind soul. She is curious about what her husband is up to, and she is not a huge fan of the cult and the other things that are happening in the castle. I guess she's not like completely aware of what's happening because she doesn't know what her husband's up to, but also she somehow knows that the cultists and stuff are going on here. Again, you don't really get the chance to meet and talk to her before everything's handled. So again, the way that I run that like post-climax, like closing of the adventure is before he takes them to her crypt, whenever the party is traveling with him, when everything's settled and they're on their way to wherever they're going, Blagothkus takes them into this tower, and I have him kind of introduce them to his wife's spirit, Esclarotta, and I role play her as for a giant. I mean, not all giants are a-holes. They are evil in general, but that doesn't mean they're jerks. You know what I mean? She is a kind and gentle soul. The book describes her that way, so I try and role play her that way. And then after he introduces you to her spirit, that's when I have him take and show them the tower where you can transport to her crypt and have that quiet moment of him. He introduces them to her spirit and then he takes them to visit her body. That's just something I like to do, is like just kind of an emotional, cathartic experience as we're settling down the end of the adventure. If anybody tries to wreck this room, she will activate the alarm rune, and Blagothkus will show up super angry 3 rounds later with 2 ogres by his side. If the party does insist on looting this room and tearing out the precious gemstones and mithril and all that, it is worth 10,000 gold pieces, but it ruins the castle's ability to move or create weather effects or any of the stuff from that list, and it will drift north until it eventually crashes at Miklos Glacier. Repairing that is extremely difficult and will take a lot of time and a ton of expense, though a wish spell could accomplish it. The book takes this section to describe the different outcomes with the castle, I guess because this is the steering room. If the party kills Blagothkus, his spirit takes Esclarotta's place, and in his rage, he drives the castle north to crash at Miklos Glacier, the same way it would have if you had destroyed this room. If you defeat the dragon and rout the cultists and Rath Modar is still alive, he will gather whatever allies are left and he will go try to defeat Blagothkus, because he knows that by killing him, the castle will crash. The same thing happens. His spirit takes over and crashes north. If the party befriends Blagothkus, it says he will take them wherever they want, though it also says right after that he will drive it north to the spine of the world. He has allies up there that he wants to go visit, but it warns that wherever you drive this castle, it is sure to attract the attention of dragons. And it says right here that if Rath Modar and the vampire chick are still alive when you take over the castle with Blagothkus as your ally, that they will do their best to thwart the party. Like I said earlier, I don't really like doing that with the vampire chick. Chances are by this point Rath Modar's gone anyway, so that doesn't really come up, but I figured I would mention it because it's in there. Area 20 is the Ogre Barracks. There are 12 ogres in here sleeping on a pile of furs. It smells exactly like you imagine an ogre barracks would smell. The ogres do each keep a little bit of coins, so if you're able to search the area, you find 800 silver pieces and 300 gold pieces. If somebody succeeds on a DC 20 investigation check, they find a single pale blue sapphire worth 500 gold pieces wedged into a crevice. Chances are that's not going to happen. Hopefully your party sides with the giants and the ogres are their allies. The book says that if one of these ogres is taken prisoner or charmed or fast-talked, that they don't have a whole lot of information, but they actually do have some pretty crucial information. They say that Blagothkus runs the castle and that he has a few guests, including the wizard in red, and the dragon lady, and a big white dragon that lives in the caves. So that's actually some pretty useful information to have. And it says to roll a DC 19 persuasion check for each of 3 more pieces of information that you could get. One is that a vampire lady watches the castle at night and sometimes feeds on the ogres, which they don't like. The second is that the cult uses the castle to visit important locations, which they don't really know because they're not geography experts. They're not the smartest guys. They refer to these areas as the Green Forest, or the stretch of the moors, or the old mountains. The last piece of information they have is that the mists and controls and everything with the castle is controlled by the giant's magic, and that without him the castle won't fly, which technically isn't true, but it's true enough for them. Again, you probably won't be interrogating these guys. You are probably most likely going to be led straight from the courtyard to Blagothkus, but just in case it so happens that you end up talking to these guys. You also could have the ogres that are taking them to Blagothkus tell them this stuff if your party tries to talk to them along the way. I have had that happen, and I basically just used this information for the ogres' talking points as they were transported. Area 21 is Esclarotta's tomb. The book describes it as an icy cyst, which is the grossest way I can imagine describing someone's tomb, but you get teleported into here if you say her name in Area 17. Again, your party would have no way of knowing that, so I have Blagothkus bring them here in that calm down at the end. It's basically just an empty room with a huge sarcophagus carved with a beautiful giant lady on the top. It's like 30 feet long and 10 feet high. It's a DC 30 strength check to push the lid off, and there is no treasure buried with her. So the party shouldn't have any reason to do that because chances are they're not even coming here until after everything's said and done. And Blagothkus will be with them, so hopefully they don't try to desecrate his wife's grave. There is writing in Dwarven along the bottom of the sarcophagus that says Esclarotta. And if you say the name Blagothkus, you get teleported back to Area 17. Area 22 is the Cloud Giant's Tower. This 70-foot high tower has a crenellated roof. There are 3 ogres up there with the same defenses that are on the watchtowers down below. They've got the ballista and javelin and stones. You're probably being brought here by those ogres from the courtyard. On the ground floor, there's some giant-sized furniture, table, and chairs. The walls are carved depicting different types of giants, stone, mountain, cloud, and they're in these massive armies. There are 4 ogres in here that each have on like a plumed helmet. They are Blagothkus' honor guard, and just the simple gift of these special helmets makes them more alert and loyal than other ogres because they know that at any time Blagothkus could just give their helmet to somebody else. The stairs in here lead up to Blagothkus' bedchamber. When you get in there, it's this large room with carvings of cloud giants riding on huge birds. They're rocks. His bed is carved so that the headboard looks like clouds, and as the party enters, they will see Blagothkus sitting cross-legged on the ground with 2 ogres combing his long, beautiful white hair, and his giant morning star leaning against the bed in arm's reach. And they will hear him complaining to the ogres about how he's afraid that the cult is going to try and take over the castle. It doesn't really make sense for him to be speaking common because ogres speak giant and that's his native language. So realistically, the party wouldn't be able to understand. But if I don't have anybody in my party who speaks giant, I just have him speaking common so they can overhear it. Because I like having this little moment where you see him kind of in a compromising setting. He's having his hair combed and he's discussing his worries, his fears. So there's almost like a sensitive, almost an empathy that you get for him as not just being like this hardened, furious enemy giant character. And then if he's surprised by the party, like if there's not been an alarm and he doesn't know the party's coming, he will respond by jumping up and grabbing his morning star. And if he thinks they're cultists or he realizes they're not enemies, he won't immediately attack unless the party keeps pushing him. But I like having that moment of like seeing him be sensitive, and then he jumps up and grabs his morning star, and all of a sudden he's this big towering giant, and you're like, okay, like it's just a quick, like hot, cold, like quick snap contrast. And I like that, seeing this character, like you get just a hint of this sensitive and then boom, evil enemy, towering, powerful giant. I like that. And then from then on, I have him present this powerful demeanor. He is the leader of this castle. He is a cloud giant. He is very prideful, as all giants are. And he's not going to show that sensitive side by choice to anyone. But I like the idea that the party knows that that's in there. It gives the character some depth. At this point is when the party negotiates with Blagothkus. There is also an invisible air elemental in here that Blagothkus can call to aid him in battle if he needs to. It can't leave this tower. It's like a servant that he has kind of attached to this place. The book says that if they surrender to Blagothkus, then he talks to them and asks their names and their intentions, like what they're doing here. But I don't like having them fight and then surrender. The party's never going to surrender for one. They will fight to the last man. So I just ignore that it says surrender. When your party talks to them, if they present themselves as enemies of the cult, knowing that he's worried about the cult, he will ask their names and their allegiances and what their plans are. It says that he will assure the party that he can take care of the cult, but just so they know, it is their plan to bring dragons back to a prominent position of power along the Sword Coast. And he's like, can you imagine? Which I don't have him be that kind of nonchalant about it. I do have him be like, don't worry, I can handle the cult. But if the party says that they want to help drive the cult out, then it says that he will go to the steering tower and he will drive, he'll lock himself in there while the party clears out the enemies. So it's kind of a quick, like, the logic doesn't really make sense. So I have him say that he's heading to the steering tower to keep anybody from sneaking around behind them and taking over the castle. He obviously cares very deeply about the castle. The spirit of his wife lives here. And then he gives the party a passphrase so that they can tell the ogres and the two stone giants down below so that they know that you're working with Blagothkus and that they should help them. That way he is helping the party. He has a reason to go to the steering area, and the party can get some allies because whenever this big final battle happens, they're going to need them. There are two huge chests in here if the party happens to be able to loot this area. One has 12,000 gold worth of gold and silver coins. The other has a bag of holding and 4,000 gold worth of gold bars and 4,000 gold worth of silver bars. Areas 23 are the giant guest chambers. They're just like the human guest chambers, except they're sized for giants. They have that same disappearing wall that leads out onto the balcony of doom. Area 24 is the servants' barracks. There are 20 kobolds in here sleeping on piles of fur and stuff, and it smells terrible. They are not going to attack the party unless they're directly threatened. You can get information from them with a DC 20 persuasion check. The book has it set up again where for each successive check you get another piece of information. And if you fail one of these checks, the kobolds clam up, they unite in their terror, and they start babbling and begging for mercy. I don't necessarily love doing that with a series of checks for every piece of information. It's an okay system for this scenario. It's not my favorite. A lot of the information is the same as before. I'll throw it up here. I'm not going to go through every piece of it. They talk about the Red Wizard, they talk about the dragon, they talk about Blagothkus and all that stuff going on. It's just another way of getting some of the same information you could have gotten from another source. Area 25 is the main vault. This is where the tunnels all lead. All these tunnels are covered with ice. You see helmets and coins and livestock and even some kobolds and a few ogres frozen into the walls where the white dragon, Glazhael the Cloud Chaser, has stored them for later. When you come into the main vault, there's an egg-shaped area at the top, and then 30 feet down below is a vast hoard of treasure frozen over with ice, and clinging to the ceiling is the adult white dragon Glazhael. If you talk to Glazhael, he is haughty and sure of the superiority of dragons over all of the small races. He sees small folk as falling into two categories, either servants, people who bring him food, or enemies, which is people who don't bring him food. He is proud to protect this treasure for Tiamat, and he doesn't usually communicate with any of the cultists other than Talus, and is kind of suspicious of Resmir and the others. It's at this moment where if you have Talus with you, that I make you roll to convince her not to turn, because once she is in the presence of Glazhael, she's reminded of the glory and the beauty of white dragons. That's the kind of dragon she's obsessed with, and she's going to have a moment where she is in such awe of the majesty of this dragon that she wants to turn on the party. I make it a DC 20 persuasion check to convince her not to betray the party and side with the dragon at this point. It says that if the party tries to fawn over and flatter the dragon and offers tribute, that he will give them the bountiful gift of sparing their lives, and to all others, it's the breath weapon. The party's not going to do that. They came here to defeat the cult. They're going to try to fight this dragon. It says that he will cling to the ceiling. He will use his breath weapon. Whenever it's not recharged, he'll use his claws and all that stuff. That if he drops to fewer than 40 hit points, he will try to escape. That he can tuck his wings in and he can make it through even narrow tunnels. And that he will scream that they're after the queen's hoard and will alert the rest of the castle. His breath weapon is going to be devastating, especially if a character fails, because at level 7 they don't have a ton of HP. But it says that if the party is clever, they can lure the dragon into a narrow tunnel where it will have disadvantage on its attacks. That is possible. White dragons are the most animalistic of the chromatic dragons, but what I do is, once the dragon sees that they're going to resist, after the first round of combat, I let it go, I let the party go. After that, on its next turn, I have it go ahead and flee through the tunnels and alert the rest of the castle and fly up above. The reason I do this is so that we can have that big epic battle, and in an arena where you can have it and it be satisfying and have a lot of moving parts. Here's the list of everything that's in the treasure hoard. What I do instead of having these +1 weapons and braces of defense is I will make them +2s. What I also do is I go through and I pick a rare item that is suited to each one of the party members and put it in here so they each get their own like big magic item reward. But this stuff's all frozen to the floor. They are not going to be able to access it until they have time. So that dragon that's flying up and alerting the whole castle, that has to be dealt with first. How I bring this all together, and this is going to go a lot faster than going room to room. The party lands, They go and they talk to Blagothkus. They make their deal with him. He tells them that if they destroy that dragon, it will be a devastating blow to the cult, and that the rest of the cultists may not have the will to fight. They know about the Red Wizard. They know about the Stone Giants. They know what's here. The party will head down to confront the dragon. Ideally, Talus doesn't betray them right then. They fight the dragon for one round. It flees back up. So when the party comes back up, in the courtyard is Resmir with her guard drakes, all of her cultists, the Red Wizards of Thay, and then the ogres and the stone giants will have gathered here too. And the party will either have stopped by and told them that they are allies with Blagothkus before, or seeing them here now, they will say the phrase that Blagothkus told them, and they will turn against the rest of these enemies. And in this big open courtyard, I have it so that the stone giants go towards Rath Modar. The ogres that are on foot are fighting the cultists. The ogres up above with their ballista are firing at the dragon. The dragon's sweeping across, blasting its frost breath. The ogres are fighting it. It's swirling around. The party is left to fight with Resmir and Azbara Jose and her guard drakes. And this chaos is all happening around them. I will occasionally have like another part of that combat spill into the area on the map that I'm using, but I have it focus on that, just that combat. And once that's handled, once she's defeated, have the rest basically have decimated each other. Rath Modar will have given up and flown away. And then as it's winding down, I will have Glazhael finally just destroy those ogres that are on the parapet and fly down and destroy what's left of the ogres down below, and even have the giants get frozen. So at the end, after this huge combat and this bloody battle in this courtyard, Glazhael flies down and it's just the party versus him. And then I will again have Glazhael attempt to convince Talus to join him, that because Resmir has been defeated, because there's this huge hole left in the power structure of the cult, that with them working together, Talus can finally achieve all of her goals that she's told him about because they have talked in the past. At that point, with Glazhael already being somewhat injured, with Talus and the party being already bloodied up from this combat, then I have Talus swap sides and join the dragon, and Talus and this dragon are flying around fighting the party. The party's going to be doing their best to fight him off and survive. At that point, if they get the dragon to less than 40 HP, which they will, I have Talus and the dragon fly off together, because that gives the party a great recurring villain. They got to defeat Resmir, the main villain from this book, and then they got to have an ally for a short time that betrayed them, which makes them hate her even more. So Talus ends up being, along with Glazhael, enemies in the next book, recurring villains for the next book, and the party has a more personal, like specific hatred for a member of the cult, other than just a general hatred for the cult for its evil. That's how I like for the final combat to go. A big battle, a big climactic scene. You get to fight Resmir and defeat her. You get to have allies on your side fighting enemies on the other side. You get to have this climactic battle with a dragon, because for a book that's named for dragons, there are surprisingly few dragons throughout this adventure. And it's this big cinematic moment. You get to defeat this villain, defeat the villain you've been chasing, and have another villain who's betrayed the party go on to be a recurring villain down the road. And theoretically, you get a flying castle. And you get all that treasure from down below. Now, Blagothkus is going to want to take the castle north to meet his allies. This is where the adventure ends, but the next book, everybody becomes aware of the looming threat, and the party is part of this council in Waterdeep, and they have to go out and try and get allies for the ultimate final confrontation at the Well of Dragons, where they're trying to resurrect Tiamat. And it mentions that the giants could become allies of the party, but there's not a really good part of that book that sends you on an adventure to make the giants your allies. There is a fun other little side adventure called The Frozen Castle that Kobold Press made that is cool, and I sometimes have used that. I haven't always, but what I like to do to transition from this to that council at Waterdeep is I will have that time with the party traveling with Blagothkus, where it talks about all that stuff, where he shows him his dead wife and all that, and then I have him ask the party to come with him to convince his giant allies to join the battle going forward against the dragons to unite the giants. And I run that between this book and the Rise of Tiamat. But that is it. Your party has defeated the main villains of the first half of this adventure. They have finished the book, The Hoard of the Dragon Queen. You have officially DM'd maybe your first campaign, or if not, you finished another one, so good job. Hopefully everybody had fun. Hopefully your party had fun, and hopefully you had fun running it. DMing is a lot of work, but it is one of the most satisfying things I've ever done. I really appreciate everybody following along that's watched all these videos and coming on this journey with me. I'm going to start rolling right into the Rise of Tiamat. We're going to get all the way to the end of this thing and hopefully defeat Tiamat. Thank you guys so much. It's a lot of work to do this, but it is really gratifying to see all the comments and all the feedback of people saying that I've helped them. That really makes doing these videos worth it. And finishing this series of videos for this book it's really nice to know that I've helped at least a few people. If you've made it this far, throw me a like. If you want to keep up with this campaign as we go on to Rise of Tiamat, any of the other campaigns I've done or any of the other videos I like to do, feel free to subscribe. If you want to support my channel, if you like what I do, you like how I do it, I do have a shop live on my channel. You can get this shirt, this hat. I've got some other fun, silly D&D apparel on there. I do have memberships live on my channel. Shout out to GL, Sammy J, Jose, Cody, Silent Wraith, Keith, Dan, Daniel, and the King in Yellow. These videos do take a lot of time, effort, and money to produce, so your guys' contribution helps out a lot, so thanks you guys. Here are some other videos I've done that you guys might like. Thanks guys, and God bless you.